Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack 4 Business Podcast.
How can your business attract, develop, and retain top emerging talent without wasting time or resources? Our guest today is Brien Convery from Convery and Company. Brien is a TEDx speaker, Chief Emerging Talent Officer at Emerge Talent, and host of the Coffee with Convery podcast. As a multi-award winning talent executive, Brien is transforming the way students, employers, and educators connect by building dynamic ecosystems that foster growth and opportunity. As a passionate youth advocate and founder of Dudes That Dine for Men's Mental Health in Toronto, he is known for bringing people together with his infectious energy and deep commitment to meaningful connections. His insights on talent development, recruitment, workforce transformation, diversity, and leadership have been featured on campuses across North America, in Toronto Radio, and in top publications like American Banker, Financial Pipeline, and Dell Technologies. With a fresh perspective and a drive for change, Brien is shaping the future where talent thrives, businesses succeed, and communities prosper. Brien, it is an absolute pleasure having you back again. How are you, sir?
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation today.
And do you have a tagline you guys like using?
Brien Company is a visionary umbrella for all of the things I do, which includes Emerge Talent, my speaking engagements, as well as my podcast. And really, for me, it's all about taking this talented ecosystem and bringing it together under a human-centric approach, putting candidates, applicants, and young people first as we think about their futures.
I noticed that you focus on emerging talent. Tell me a little bit more about that journey.
Absolutely. So I've been on a career journey and done a number of different portfolios throughout my career. The past 13 plus 15 years, I've been really focusing on emerging talent. And what emerging talent really means, the youth. As Canada describes youth, it's 18 to 35. Basically, the youth segment is struggling to adapt and transition into the markets over the last bit. And especially this year, it's been a tougher year due to a number of economic pressures. But the reason why I focus and stay in this lane is because we all had someone give us a shot when we were younger in our careers, and someone took a chance and hired us for our potential. And unfortunately now, with a lot of different things going on, a lot of skilled laborers in the market, companies and individuals and people are somewhat not creating that space to help young people think about what they can do and help them transition into workforce opportunities. There's been quite a bit of disruption recently. We could talk about all the things going on politically. Let's not get into that. But with that, there's definitely a more difficult landscape as it's presenting itself today. And that's why I stay in this space, because I feel each one of us got somewhere and I need to help others with thinking through this differently and change some hearts and minds.
Have you found that businesses are able to integrate the students into their workspace, or are they having issues? Are they fumbling, or are they having a hard time making that cross connect with the emerging students coming out?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that emerging talent includes both students in school as well as graduates. I think the graduates hitting the market are seeing one of the worst markets in a long time compared to recent years. As far as adaptability, I think it's twofold. One, it's the individual adapting to the environment. Two, it's the environment, the culture, and the company adapting to a new generation of workforce. When I look at both sides, these young people that are coming up, the Gen Z, have grown up very differently, as all generations grow up differently, but they've grown up in a situation where a lot of what they did in high school and university and maybe even their first internship was all online. So trying to develop that interpersonal skill set, understanding how to read a room, understanding those, I would say, adulting skills have been a bit challenging for some of them. Not all of them, but for some of them. And then I think on the flip side, the companies that I speak to are getting flooded with so many applications that it's overwhelming. They don't have programs and mentorships and opportunities built once they arrive. There is guidance, there is mentorship, there is things that we need to do to assimilate and accept them into the organization. But a lot of the companies don't necessarily have that. So what's the easy decision? I'll hire someone who has the skills.
You've mentioned some interesting things like being proactive with mentorships and systems. Tell me a little bit about how you plug those in so that you have a likelihood of success.
Absolutely. Great question. I have always approached recruiting of new individuals into an organization that your onboarding and your first 90 days are critical, right? For everybody joining a company. Do you feel like you belong? Is it the job you signed up for? Do things come together in those first 90 days that make you want to stay and continue to work there? So, one of the biggest things with recruiting, and my humble opinion, is that recruiting should also be involved in the onboarding process. That you are their one link to that company. And if you can carry that from the recruitment cycle into the onboarding, and also create opportunities for peer-to-peer buddy systems or mentorship in the sense of ability to talk to people in the roles or to talk to other people at the company. Because right now we are focused on hybrid situations where not everyone's in the office on the same day. The bottom line is people need that opportunity to connect and build relationships within the organization.
As a guy who is on the other side of 60, I could hear someone saying, why should I pour into putting systems in place to bring these young people on and invest in them when they take themselves shopping every 45 to 60 days?
So here's my response to that. Number one, Gen Z is going to be by 2030, 30% of the workforce. So they're coming, whether we like it or not, they're coming. And as far as investing, I humanize this question because I get asked often by executives and leaders, how do you have the energy to work with all these young people and mentor and coach? I try to turn that question around and say, don't you have a daughter or a son or a niece or nephew or a neighbor kid who you really care about? If we don't take that human approach to sharing a few minutes with some of these folks, who will? These young people are also coming with skills. Let's not get that wrong. They are on AI right now, 68% of their day. We talk about upskilling individuals at companies in AI and getting ahead of it and figuring it out. Imagine bringing in someone who's grown up with it, uses it every day, who loves working with it, who can maybe teach you a few things about AI while you talk to them and have a mutually beneficial conversation, discussion, learning. But these are the architects of our future. And if we don't start spending time with them now, we won't have as much fun in our later years in retirement if we don't have people who know how to do something.
It almost sounds like the Cats in the Cradle song coming out here.
It does.
How do you set the expectations, both for the employer and the person coming into the job? You have certain expectations. They do work and they get paid. How do you set the expectations enough, but without overpromising it? And that way they're not disappointed. If something happens that's a yay moment for either the employer or the employee or the group itself, how do you set it up so that the expectations, here's the base and everything after this is gravy in your eye?
It's a great question. Expectation setting is one of the critical steps. I'll be honest, recently I've had a lot of conversations with individuals who said, will you talk to my son or daughter? Or can I have you talk to my friend's kid who's in school? I'm like, sure, but what do you want me to talk about? They're somewhat struggling with their first job and understanding sort of the expectations. And I think to your point, it comes both sides. But I think one of the things I see, especially with Gen Z, and this is a bit of a generalization, but it's been through multiple conversations I've had this insight. There's a lot of things that parents have done, not necessarily in favor of supporting this transition for their child. If from home into university or university into their first job, like you need to let them fall and skin their knee. You need to make decisions on their own. Over the last few years, it's become more of not even helicopter parents, but what they call bulldozer parents, where they clear everything out of the way so that everything is ready for them and they don't have to worry about any conflict or anything along the way of work or in school. And this is really creating, and sometimes I hear the word softer generation, but I also feel for them because if this is what they've learned, then when they're faced with that and the expectations of a job, they may not be as well prepared. I think that's where I jump in. I'm looking at opportunities to build accelerators. The human skills for these individuals are really needed. There's a lot of cases where expectation setting is, I'm going to be the CEO tomorrow, but we all have to start off somewhere. I always talk to young people about it's not a race to the top. You need to actually enjoy the journey, but also learn different things as building blocks to get you there. Your first job won't be your last job, right? None of us first job was our last job. And I can imagine every one of us here has done something in their career, early in their career, maybe and later in their career. They didn't love it or they didn't want to do it necessarily long term, but they're all experiences that build you up to be who you are and understand what you like, what you don't like. So expectation setting, I think, first for young people entering the workforce is they should expect that they're going to do different things that maybe isn't what they thought they would be doing with their degree. Let's talk about that from a university perspective. On the other side, the employers need to set expectations as well around when they come in, what are the goals of the role? What are the objectives? What are the learnings they expect them to have? How does the culture work? So if you set that up, where if you don't hear something correctly, you can go back and ask another question. That's all going to help for success. So I think it's a little bit of expectation setting on both sides. But I really think right now we have to help these individuals transition and also tell the parents to maybe take a back seat.
Let's assume that you need a new hire. And let's assume that almost everyone knows they need a new hire because they're overwhelmed. How do you help the other staff train and equip and show them where the washrooms are when they feel overwhelmed themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. Starting a new job anywhere is a stressful situation for everyone. You don't know what to expect when you walk in the door, even though you heard everything in the recruiting process and all the things along the way. But I think from my perspective, a welcoming, a welcome mat for individuals coming into your organization, no matter what stage of their career, gives people a sense of belonging. And I think it goes a long way to say, take 10 minutes, show them where things are, get them set up. I feel like that's part of teaming and proper teaming and also being part of a team. And I think that we all should find time in our day to welcome new people into the organization because ultimately they're going to be working on things that you may learn something new from, or they may be helping you out on some work that you have.
You ever deal with folks that are going overseas or to another country? I say overseas, I'm thinking across the ocean, but it could be south of the border. Does that Is that more complex than to say, hi,
Sure.
I'm here in Ontario and I'm going to go work for, pick a large corporation or bank? Does that spin the dial a little bit harder?
Absolutely. And if you think about the four different generations in the workforce right now, each having their own communication style, each having their own lived experiences, and each having a way that they like to work. And then if you add on the complexities, a new country or coming to a new country, I recently did a talk about cultural intelligence being the next emotional intelligence. It's understanding who's in the room and trying to understand and learn from them and where they're coming from and what they've learned because I may say something based on my experience and from a cultural perspective, it may throw you through a loop to understand what did he mean by that? Or what was the hidden meaning? And maybe there is no hidden meaning. It was just the way that I've learned to talk and conduct myself. So it absolutely does make it more complex. I think, especially if you're a young individual, I've talked to a lot of young individuals that have come to Canada at 17, 18 on their own without family, right? To start their schooling and get their first internship. I applaud those folks for taking the risk, being adaptable, doing all those things, but you're still a very young, impressionable person. And at that time, coming to a new country can be super overwhelming, just understanding how things work.
Is there a sense of how long on average it takes for a person to have enough understanding of the new culture and tools to be productive? Is there some kind of a metric?
That's a great question. I think Different people adapt differently based on a whole lot of variables. But I also think there's hiring for cultural fit and sometimes for cultural add. It's healthy to come in and understand a culture you're working in, grow and expand your mind in those new geographies that you might end up in working. But the cultural add that people can bring too is a different view or a different opinion or a different insight into things as well. So sometimes I throw in some people through our loop, asking them to say, don't just look for cultural fit, look for cultural add. I wanted to describe that because I think it really does help to bring those different voices to the table who ultimately are going to lead to innovation and education for everyone.
When you're looking at the person, the student, or the business, what assessment tools do you wrap around that? So, you know what? This person likes doing their detail oriented. The company needs detail oriented versus the company needs grand thoughts. And this person is better at grand. How do you find that these two things go together? Not a square plug in a round hole moment.
I really am a firm believer in assessments and embracing AI to help us more. I've seen tools that lean into better ways of identifying individuals and what they're capable of doing, but also where their interests lie. So when you look at their interests, skills, and passions, being able to assess that will help you. One of the biggest things to think about is, are you fitting them into the whole or hiring this talent for the future? So that becomes a challenge because when you ask people about workforce planning and thinking ahead, sometimes we're recruiting for a specific job, a specific way for it to be done in a specific time. Now we're moving more towards skills-based recruiting and really starting to look at stretching your mind a bit. Maybe they're not exactly fitting in the hole, but they're going to get us to here because of what they know and have experience. So let's also hire for the future.
So, if you want to stay ahead of the curve, what trends should we be looking at that are coming so that we get there unruffled and actually plugged in?
This is a great question. I like to use the word upskilling. I haven't worked for companies where I was leading the talent and the upskilling was going on in parallel. A lot of times, the challenge of keeping ahead and upskilling is many organizations don't necessarily know the current skills of their employees. You may have filled out this, let's say, form or document about all the skills you have when you were hired, and it's sitting there stagnant, and you've progressed through the organization, learning new things all the time. So I think one of the biggest things to stay ahead is really look at upskilling from a strategic point of view. If your team is here and they need to be here, how do you get them there? Is it education formally? Is it workshops, boot camps? Whatever the case may be, we own it for ourselves. We own it for our own careers, and we own it for our teams and our organizations. So I think upskilling is probably the way to get there. However, all the research I've done, all the experience I've been in upskilling, we're still chipping at that iceberg because stuff is happening faster than it ever has. How do you upskill? And then you get there and it's already moved to something else. That's probably the best way to consider staying ahead, is really having true upskilling programs and also identifying what your current skills of your team are.
Let's assume you have a culture where you plug in interns. Do you find that keeping the intern community fresh and around lets them plug in maybe even a while down the road? Tell me about how interns are getting people into regular full-time hires beyond that internship.
Absolutely. A big strategic component of a proper emerging talent early in career campus recruitment strategy is converting your interns to full-time jobs. That's a big reason why a lot of organizations invest in internships, because they want to hire them at low cost and experience and then grow them within the organization. There is an opportunity, as long as you lead with the vision and where you want to go and what opportunities are there. I think a lot of times the people of the organization have a hard time articulating that. And that's what someone's thinking about when they think about staying. But there's a lot of really cool programs out right now. I'll do a plug for the University of Windsor, who I most recently have been working with. They have a Master's of Applied Computing program with people that already have experience and degrees. And what's really a cool part of this program is they complete their internship at the end of their school. They're done, ready to be hired after their internships. Universities and colleges that also look creatively at building something that creates an easy opportunity for employees to say, you know what, this 6 months with this intern was great. Let's offer them a full-time job. Oh, wait, you got to go back to school for another year. In this case, where there are those programs, and especially from the University of Windsor, where we were able to actually convert those students directly in the job that they were in, making it easier for the employers. It really makes opportunities for schools to be more innovative in the way that they structure their internships, lean in a bit more into the business needs and how that's evolving. If you do it the old way that you've always done, you're going to be left behind. Businesses don't have time to figure out the ecosystem of the post-secondary schools. They need something that works.
Are you finding that there's certain industries that this really flows well with and others that is, man, it's a bit of an uphill battle?
It flows well in tech. For whatever reason, tech roles, tech jobs, tech experiences, tech industries, they've really understood and continue to understand the value of hiring young people. I was talking to a founder the other day. They just got a big amount of money and they know they're going to only be able to ramp with young people and bringing them into the organization. They're ready to start hiring. I think some of the other industries don't necessarily sign up for co-ops and internships as easily. For example, if I think of HR, where I've spent the last few years, there's not many junior HR leadership roles for young people to join an organization. In certain sectors and industries, there's maybe a surplus even in some cases, but in specific areas like people not going into the medical field or going into HR but not finding jobs, or even let's say the trades really needs to attract young people right now and they're having difficulty. There's labor market data that's important to look at, but sometimes that's not connected to the ecosystem where these students are studying. We need to get younger and younger with the students and schools to understand where there's a deficit and where there'll be jobs in the future, because that's where the internships need to be created for apprenticeships and other things.
One thing that's a little different is there's a movement out there that said there are no employees. There are only contractors and gig workers. What do you see an employee brings to a company that is structural, that actually is more than the to-do list they have?
Okay, so this is a great insightful question because the gig economy, fractional work, all these things are on the rise. It plays to an entrepreneurial spirited individual who wants to work for multiple companies and organizations, or just likes variety of things. I think this is a really huge talent question because companies are realizing that what we used to call just contractors becoming fractional workers or hiring for a specific project now, it's not much different than what we did in the past, but they're more aligned to specific needs or wants. And sometimes it's easier to employ those people than a full-time person due to whatever headcounts. So I think this is going to be a big meeting of the minds. Like when you post a job, is it going to be part-time fractional contract or is it going to be full-time? But I see more and more happening on the fractional contract side. I don't know if that breaks down the culture of the organization or has a negative effect. The contracts I've worked on, I've felt like part of the team. I think there's more to be said there, and I think there's a lot more that needs to be looked at.
I know that people change careers with a little more frequency than maybe the folks from the 50s. With that said, though, usually if you started a job, think back to our grandfather's time, there's a pension attached to it. There's certain things you anchor into. It's usually not top of mind for someone in their 20s. How do I save up for that part when we're now crossing the other side of the fence, where we're contemplating, I want to retire or semi-retire, etc. Do I have a bag of money sitting in a bank somewhere, or do I have an investment? How do you, because if you're hopping between jobs,
Yeah.
How do you have a pension? Unless, of course, you're like if you're doing government service and you're jumping between government departments or between, say, in the province of Ontario, who could follow you around? One of the pension benefit platforms, one of them, right?
Yeah.
How do you build up that reservoir so that at the end of the cycle, you want to be able to enjoy the post 60 plus years or
Yeah.
post?
I also see, to your point, younger people, I guess I started putting into my 401k when I was right first job, but I think that the pension idea and the investment side is falling more towards the individual. A lot of times I see a lot of young students and young people who've already built and sold their first company. They're investing in Bitcoins, doing all these different things that weren't really around when I was learning how to invest. And I think that's a market where people are really taking that ownership of their own sort of development. So I think that's when it comes to investing, I don't know where companies are going to go with their whole pension thing because a lot of times now people are doing multiple jobs, different companies, different careers. A lot of companies aren't necessarily looking for you to stay there 30 years. They want new ideas, they want new blood, they want new things. So I just think that's an evolution of the time.
You think there's a market for someone to say, build your pension with us and you can hopscotch all over the place?
Absolutely. When you look at wealth investors and different people that do this, it's super smart to do that at any time in your career because, like you said, your grandfather's day, or even my father, who was 30 years with IBM and has a pension, those kind of things don't exist. So, really reaching out to people in the financial markets that can help you think through that and building time for that is super important.
So, what are three things business can do right now to actually acquire and nurture that upcoming talent?
Okay, so I'm going to lead with something I recently spoke about at the Microsoft headquarters here in Toronto. It was a keynote I gave, and there was a number of people in the audience. These were founders, CTOs, HR, talent, a whole variety of people. I told everyone, please raise your hand if you ever turned down someone because they didn't have experience, so you didn't hire them. The hands went up. I said, okay, now please keep your hands up. And for others whose hands aren't up, answer this question and put your hand up. Tell me if you were ever hired with no experience. And all the hands stayed up. So the obvious aha moment was, okay, we have been hired without experience for a role, but we've also not hired someone because they didn't have experience. So think a little bit deeper on that. Companies need to hire for potential right away, start to think about skills for the future, and open your hearts and minds to new individuals. There was a gentleman who I shared his journey who was a lawyer, who first started out as an auditor, who became a lawyer, who learned AI on his own, and is now one of the top 10 AI leaders in the US for 2025. You would have not looked at his resume coming out of audit and also being a lawyer to lead any sort of AI at your company, right? But I think it's really understanding more and more about the individuals, and companies really need to start to spend a little bit more time getting to know them and what their potential is, not always worrying about what they've done in the past.
Ryan, tell me about Campus in a Box.
Campus in a box. Absolutely. With my company, Brien Convery, we have a solution called Emerge Talent. And within that, we have services, and those services include Campus in a Box. So Campus in a Box is basically a opportunity for me to engage three different audiences: students, businesses, and post-secondary institutions. And what I've developed is a Campus in the Box solution where we can plug and play different components of what each audience is looking to do and primarily focus in on what they need. So for businesses, most recently, I worked with a client who had not gotten into early talent, emerging talent at all. And they wanted me to help do a gap analysis and build a strategy for them. So that was a strategy play. Now, there's possible implementations of that strategy as well. The University of Windsor, I recently helped them redefine their footprint in the Toronto market, being 4 hours away from the downtown core. I did a lot of business development leadership and employee engagement to help them think differently about engaging here and launching a few different ideas. So that was their Campus in a Box. It begins with an assessment and me listening, and then it helps understanding what the problem you're trying to solve. And then it's tailored towards your specific opportunity.
Are there any key red flags for either the employer or the employee, the prospect, that they should be mindful of?
Red flags as far as,
It's not going to be a good fit. It's like
Yeah.
getting the mystery soup. You like this soup? No. I saw enough. The smell wasn't good. I overrode all the red flags and said, stop before you go too far.
I'm going to call out one of the biggest red flags I hear from my talent friends right now, and I'm sure it's going to be discussed at the meetup I'm going to tomorrow. There's a lot of fraud right now happening in talent. People misrepresenting themselves, using AI to build their resumes, and then being an interview and haven't even done what's on their resume. It's gone as far as people actually doing interviews for people, and then the other person shows up at the job and everyone there is that who we interviewed? And that's happened at companies. By the third month before you figure it out, they've already been there collecting their paycheck. I think one of the biggest red flags is if it doesn't smell good, go with your instincts because there could be something really there. We are seeing a lot of this happening, unfortunately. It's really disheartening because those that are really out there trying hard to get a job and find an opportunity, when you have people that are being dishonest or misrepresenting themselves or their skills, look for those red flags. There's lots of opportunities that these are happening, and you can read up on it online. There's a lot of stories out there around companies that have hired someone and it wasn't the person that they thought they were going to hire.
So, in business, that's an issue. Someone says, come buy this right here. They open up their coat and want to buy a watch. It's a real Rolex, honest. It's just super cheap. And that's comedy level. But if you have someone that it does an introduction, we hear that both Wayne and I in networking circles, get to know and trust. In other words, we know this person and someone does a referral, word of mouth referral. Is that something that your service then builds into so that if the emerging talent's coming up, it's bona fide and you do somewhat of a vetting? It may not be absolutely perfect, but at the end of the day, the boss might not get along with the new prospect coming in. They just don't vibe together, or they really do vibe. Is that something that you also offer in that process?
100%. So really in the playbook that I work with employers and post-secondary schools on redefining the landscape on engagement with employers and students, it's really about understanding the talent and having those authentic conversations. When I introduce any candidate to a referral or an opportunity, even when I get asked for a referral, I need to understand who that person is and feel comfortable that I would want to hire them. I have been in situations being in talent in the past where a person's called me up at a company I've worked at and said, hey, I got this referral. Can you talk to them? When you do more digging, I'm like, how do you know them? They're like, oh, they were in a line behind me in the supermarket and they saw my badge and said, hey, can you get me a job there? And I said, so that's not a referral. That's just someone who can go to careers.com and apply. Google did a good job on this years ago where if you're going to have a referral program at any company, you have to actually vet some questions like, how do you know them? How would you vet for them? Where do you, and that's where I've seen at companies where that previous situation with the supermarket, a tap on the shoulder, by introducing a process of referrals that are maybe not referrals and asking a few questions, you end up weeding those out so that the real referrals that people do know and can vouch for and feel comfortable putting them forward, they become true bona fide referrals.
Brian, you have a podcast. Who should
I
be
do.
listening and what's its name?
Sure. It's Coffee with Convery, and it is available at coffeewithconvery.com. The tagline for the podcast is you don't need to climb the corporate ladder for success. You can build your own jungle gym. We all take different paths to get to where we want and define our own success. You can find it on all the podcast channels. It's also on YouTube. And the audience right now is primarily 18 to 35-year-olds who are looking to understand from people like ourselves and others what success looked like for them. What are some pitfalls and things we learned along the way, but also an opportunity for students to share their journeys. So it has been going fairly well. Over 200 episodes. We're streaming in 17 countries. And the audience is, again, 18 to 35, but I've started to see a shift in people pivoting careers. We want to talk about that as well and understand what does it mean to think about pivoting in my career. So I've seen an uptick in that age group as well.
Somebody with a browser anywhere in the world could be listening. But is there a geography that you tend to specialize in? How do we reach you?
Absolutely. So I'm here based in Toronto, Canada. So majority of my reach is across the Canadian landscape through work or my podcast. Public speaking, I've done in both North America, US, and Canada. But I've also just worked with a company who's based out of Paris, France. You never know where it'll take you in this global environment. You can reach me specifically at my website, brienconvery.com, also on LinkedIn. And you can also reach out even on Emerge Talent if you want to look at those solutions and services. Pretty easy to find. Brien with an E. There's not many Briens with an E. When you look up Brien Convery, you'll find me.
I want to say thank you to Brien Convery and my co-host Wayne Pratt, you, the Knack for Business listeners. If you're ready to future-proof your business, Brien is the person to have a chat with.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVINSIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive 8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.